Hey, you're back at the Faculty Factory podcast, and I'm Kim Skorupski. And with me today is Dr. Jay MacGregor. Dr. McGregor is here because, once again, our Faculty Factory friend, Dr. Rachel Salas, said, Kim, you got to have this guy. He's amazing. One of her colleagues in the Alpha Omega Alpha Medical Society, so he's a fellow. Dr. McGregor is a colorectal surgeon. He is the Vice President of Medical Affairs at Allina Health in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And he's an assistant professor at the University of Colorado and a Trails Director for the medical school's leadership curriculum. Is that right, Jay?
You got it. Perfect.
Okay. I read an article that Dr. McGregor wrote in the Pharos. It's winter 2023. The Pharos is the newsletter for the AOA Medical Society. And it was just such a great inspirational way that Jay described this, he cites Joseph Campbell, that you are the hero of your own story. And he talks about this narrative arc. And I just thought it was so beautiful. It kind of touches on history and back in the Greeks, and we were talking about Odysseus and Mentor and Athena and all these roots of academia and how just our careers and our life journey can take us through so many trials and tribulations, and kind of the hero wins at the end here. And so when Jay and I were just talking, we were kind of exploring how this story could go. And I'm telling you, he has laid out an amazing story with 5 subheadings. So I'm going to let Dr. McGregor take it over, and he is going to lead us on a fascinating journey. Dr. McGregor, take it over.
Hey, Kim, thank you so much. Thanks for that kind introduction. And I just want to thank you for the Faculty Factory podcast. I've been a listener for some time. It's a great resource for a lot of us, even if we're not lucky enough to be at Hopkins. It's just a great thing you do. So thanks. And it's truly an honor to be here. So thank you to Rachel as well for connecting us. I've really been looking forward to it. Like you mentioned, I hope that my contribution to the podcast could be from someone who wasn't a superstar in their journey through healthcare. I'll kind of fast forward to the end. I love what I'm doing now. I love my job. I love how I can interface with patients and a healthcare system, but that wasn't always the case. And I just hope that's something that I can share, perhaps for listeners out there or students or residents who are maybe thinking about doing something else or even giving up on medicine, like the situation I was in not too long ago. So that's really the message that I hope we can talk about. And maybe I'll just lay a little background and I can share some of the things that the thoughts or the ideas that helped me go from someone who was ready to walk away from medicine to someone who really likes their job. As by way of quick background, I grew up in a family of physicians and surgeons, and that's a pretty awesome way to grow up. A lot of great opportunities. I knew a lot about how healthcare and medical training worked, even from a young age. And I would say that really put the idea of becoming a surgeon as kind of my Mount Everest. It was something I thought I really wanted to see if I could do it. I was laser focused to get to that goal. And in the process, I had some real challenges. I had some challenges with the academic part. I had some challenges in residency. It seemed like any multiple choice test I took, I fell short of where I thought I should be. But I still was able to get to a part that I was very proud of, to be a colorectal surgeon and be able to be in frontline practice, which I did for about 4 years. I was taking call every other night. I really felt like I was making an impact on the community where I lived. But I realized that, kind of like Mount Everest, once you climb the mountain, it wasn't where I wanted. It didn't really fit with where I wanted to stay. I couldn't see myself doing that for the rest of my career. And that for me was actually a little bit of kind of a career existential crisis, because I thought this is something I'd always wanted to do. I actually got there through some trials and tribulations, but then I thought, it doesn't seem like it's the right fit. And the prevailing wisdom, at least at that time, was you're either a doctor and a surgeon or you're not. So that was really challenging for me. What was I going to do? I've now invested 20 years of my life to get somewhere that wasn't quite what I thought I wanted to do. So these are some ideas that I came across, read about, thought about, that help me, and maybe they'll be helpful to your viewers, and hopefully we can talk about them if you want. One idea is the concept of the adjacent possible. And what I noticed when I was in medical school, I had some friends who were in law school, and a fair number of their classmates in law school said, "Oh, yeah, I'm not going to practice law. I just want this education to help me in these other things that I might be doing." And I really didn't hear that in medicine at all. And I think it was kind of too bad that there's so much brilliant people in medicine. We learn so much about how to analyze a problem and be real world problem solvers in high pressure environment. But you don't really hear about people in medicine saying that they have transferable skills or the adjacent possible. And I didn't really run into anyone who thought that way until I read a book by Jack Cochran, who's the past CEO of Kaiser Permanente, that was called Healer, Leader, Partner. And he was a surgeon who became a CEO, and he attributed his surgical training to making him a very effective executive. And I found that pretty inspiring. Another concept, and maybe I'll just list these off if that's okay. I feel like I'm talking a lot,
Yeah.
but please interrupt me. The other concept is the idea of the blue ocean strategy. And there are some now pretty well-known French management professors, Dr. Kim and Moburn, and they suggested this idea of a blue ocean strategy, meaning going where the water is blue, go where the competition doesn't exist. And I felt like in a lot of what we consider the American success stories, people have done that. But I felt like in medicine and certainly in surgery, we're almost encouraged to go right into the heart of all the competition. You want to do a surgical subspecialty, guess what? There are a lot, that's what we'd call the red water. That's where the sharks are. So you're competing against these great people. And certainly at a place like Hopkins, there are lots of big sharks around, and the competition is fierce. This idea, you can go to where the water's blue, where the competition isn't, and maybe that's a real opportunity. The other idea that I really like is the idea of the Pareto principle, that 80-20 rule. Again, going back to surgery, I felt like it was kind of like the 98%, 2% rule. We were all working so hard to get into that top tier, but you realize that sometimes 20% of your effort in other areas can result in 80% of the return. And if you take the idea of squaring that, which was a fun concept I heard from a podcaster and author named James Altucher, but if you were to square the Pareto principle, so 80% squared and 20% squared, the idea is that with 4% of the effort, perhaps you could get 64% of the return. And I'll come back to that in a second. But I thought that was a pretty neat way of thinking about developing alternative skills that maybe I didn't have. I don't have to invest myself 20 years in another career. Perhaps in my free time, I can get some version of my own training or interest or development and get an awful lot of the return to make me unique. Which leads me to the idea of the talent stack. And this is one that I really like. I did not come up with this. I first heard of this through the creator of Dilbert, and maybe others have talked about this, but this idea that if you think about a cartoonist, you don't have to be the best artist. You don't have to be the funniest person. You don't have to be the best writer. But if you can do those several things fairly well, you could probably be a fairly successful cartoonist. I tried to apply that idea to being a surgeon or being a physician leader. What if I wasn't the world's greatest surgeon, but I knew enough to really have that experience to be relatable? What if I had interest in strategic thinking? What if I had some business background? What if I had some legal background and I could put those things together into a very unique talent stack? And so that's what I decided to do. So I got an MBA, but I didn't spend years only doing that. I did that in my off time. I got a master's degree in jurisprudence, which is a law degree, but it doesn't allow me to become a lawyer. But again, it's this idea I was probably putting in about 4% of the time in comparison to someone who's just going into business or just going into law. But I had this big return on that investment compared to people who'd never had that training. So I felt like as a surgeon with some business background, with some legal background, it created a very unique talent stack, or at least that was my hope. And then the other idea, I'm sorry I've been rambling, but the other idea is this idea of pay yourself first. And some of us may have heard this in the context of saving and investing. So if you want to save for retirement, take that 10% out of your paycheck before you do anything else. You've paid yourself first. That way, you don't get to the end of the month and have to find out where your savings is coming from. And I thought that was a pretty interesting idea. And actually, John Grisham, the author, did the same thing getting his writing career started. He paid himself first. So rather than letting everyone else fill up his calendar with his time, he put in the time in the day. This is when he was actually a lawyer, to say, these are the hours when I'm writing, and I'm actually taking this out of my available work day. So he paid himself first as something that was really important to him. And so that idea of, do you have enough give or enough slack in the rope in your life to devote a little bit of time, maybe it's 10% of your time, or maybe it's less, just something that you're just passionate about, you're just interested in. And I feel like if you, or at least I was hoping that if you could do that, you can find where your interests truly are, and then go more towards that and less of the parts of any job that might be frustrating or burning you out. And so those kind of guiding principles were what allowed me to start taking some professional risks. And the more I would take risks, it seems like the more things would work out, and that's been pretty exciting. So I'll stop, but that's kind of the background of where I'm coming from.
Jay, I hope and pray, like we talked about, that you write this. This needs to be a book, minimally needs to be an editorial, an article. Yeah,
Thanks,
taking
Kim.
a risk. You are so courageous to do this. Not only courageous to walk an unwalked path and chart your own path, but also then to talk about it publicly, as you obviously have done in a lot of different invited lectures. And so thank you for doing it. Everything you've talked about, it's so anti-establishment, anti what we're taught to, like, focus very deeply on something. You have to be the expert in this, specialize on that. When I was in graduate school, I remember the picture of the hourglass, the sands in the hourglass, the idea that when we're young in our careers, young as students, we get a lot of information and a big funnel. And our job as we go through graduate school, medical school, fellowship is to narrow, focus. And then that focus part is where we get our international expertise and build our reputation and have impact. And then later on, we can broaden back out, and then maybe have more diverse interests. That's just the way it's always been in my mind. That one of the criticisms that I heard leveled to me, and my problem was, Kim, your problem is people may perceive you as being a mile wide and an inch deep. Whereas in academia, we're supposed to be, a mile deep and an inch wide. So I like how you're twisting our minds and helping us think about another way of being. And so obviously I have lots and lots of questions, but could you take us back? And I'm thinking of the faculty members who are listening to this going, amen, hallelujah. I want to know, what were some of the things Jay was feeling? You described growing up with both your parents who were physicians. This was kind of like 20-some year journey. At what happened? Can you recall when you were every other night on service? What were you thinking? What were you feeling when you were like, whoa, not cool? Is this all there is? Is this as good as it gets, kind of thing? Can you take us back to that point where something triggered you that this can't be it?
Yeah, no, thank you. So my my father, both grandfathers, brother-in-law are physicians. My sister's a dentist. My mom was actually an art teacher, just to throw that out there. But obviously also really valued education. So having a degree in a profession was, I mean, as soon as I knew what school was, it was important to do well. And I, I bought in. I thought, as long as I do these things, it's really going to be great. And it was a very exciting, I mean, a lot of this process was very exciting, but the idea of actually being um, in frontline practice with 2 days of OR and 2 days of clinic and a day of GI and being on call, I just remember feeling as though it had gotten to the point where the things that kind of made me unique, I just couldn't do. I didn't have time for it. And I would say that led to that moment where, when I have two daughters, and when my older daughter, and we lived in the same community with my in-laws, which was great. But I remember one of these busy weekends, we were all getting together for a meal, and my daughter asked my wife if my father-in-law was her dad or if I was. And that was one of those full stop, something has to change. That's
Wow.
too far. So it wasn't at that moment that I said I just want to stop doing everything, but I thought, how can I find a way to do this and still be connected with my family and have outside interests that may not amount to anything, drawing and photography, but how can these things be a part of who I am, but also not throw off what I've spent so long trying to cultivate and develop? I didn't know how I could be a surgeon and not be 100% involved and committed to it. And I think this is still the case, although maybe it's a little different now. But there was also people, I mean, people would say, if you're not 100% practicing, you've betrayed people, or you're not doing what you should be doing in this profession. And that's a hard message to hear when you're pretty new and you're trying to establish yourself. So I think that's the message for whether you're a full professor or just starting as a pre-med in college, you really do have a lot of agency with how you spend your time. And I think that message that there's only one way to do it, it's just not true. So, and if you are the mile, an inch wide and a mile deep, and that really resonates with you, thank goodness. We need those people, and they're invaluable. But I also think people that choose more breadth, even if it's sacrificing some of the depth, I think we're also in a time where that can really be fun, and it can also be very impactful as well, with all
Mhm.
the technology and the innovation. I think it's those people that's perhaps stumble into some of these intersections who really are doing things that 10 years ago we couldn't even imagine.
Well, I agree with you, because you're of course making me think of all the disciplinarity that we all practice now, trying to not only um, collaborate with our faculty colleagues from other schools and departments and institutions, but other industries. And so everything you're talking about now, reminds me of getting even more creative, and instead of doing sabbaticals at other institutions to learn, which may be valuable, this technique or this surgical practice or this research methodology. Yes, yes, yes. What about going to manufacturing or an engineering plant or aeronautical? And wouldn't that be wonderful if we could exercise our minds and our brains in different ways? And that also reminds me of, here at Hopkins, we have our biomedical engineering students who they were working with medical students and just coming up with these just inventions just on the fly of things that you wouldn't. I'm like, because I'm thinking, well, everything's been invented by now, surely, right? Is there anything left to invention? I mean, I was always mad that I could never invention anything because everything's always been invented already. I remember in science fair. So I'm like, I always wanted to invent something, but thought it was already done. but it is always amazing to see a group of people in a room who are from completely different industries. And once you get the language synced up and what can be birthed from that. So yes, why can't we extend our vision? But I'm wondering now, when you started noodling around with this and you started thinking about the adjacent possible, when you started thinking about what if, I wonder if, what did your mentors say? What did your dad and your uncle and your sister and your wife was there any kind of pushback? Like, I can't believe, you have invested a lot of money in this. And what are you talking about? What is this going to look like? Fear, nervousness, like a mentor going, I can't believe you're going to let me down. Or you said earlier, the guilt of, I'm imagining now I've got friends who are anesthesiologists and there's so few of them. And the nation has we're losing people in this specialty. And so now you're talking about there's so few of you, you're a nurse and you're going to leave nursing, really? So how did that play out with people closest to you supporting you or kind of being disappointed in you?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think one of the real secret weapons that I had was my wife and my family. So the idea of doing something and being unhappy in it was just never, I was never really pushed in that direction. So the idea that I was making a decision or even considering something that could allow me to know my daughters better, I mean, there was never any pushback on that. So I was very lucky in that sense. But I think the other part that I now know, I didn't know at the time, but there are steps and gradations you can take. So I was in a community that had a VA facility, and I thought, well, maybe being involved in the VA would be a 6-month plan that'll allow me to really think about this and figure out what's next. And when I joined the VA system, they needed a chief of surgery badly. And I never really saw myself doing something like that. But I thought, well, that's something that, why wouldn't I try that and just try it, just see if it's any different than the type of practice I was in before. And I really enjoyed it. It really, that was something that took me in a whole different direction. And then in that system, in this large interconnected healthcare system, there was this huge need for all kinds of physician leaders who were in the middle of their career, not at the end of their career. So that became, getting back to that blue ocean strategy, I just kept saying yes to things. So it wasn't that I went from saying I'm full tilt practice to just stopping, but I took a small step, which then opened up these other opportunities. And doing something like a leadership development program in the VA, I learned a ton, and I realized there weren't a lot of people that were doing that. So that then put me on shorter and shorter lists for opportunities. The other thing that's a real testament to my wife and daughters is being willing to move, which is a whole different discussion. But if you're at a point in your life where you said, hey, I can not only apply for a position, but if I get it, I can move my family across the country. I know I'm just lucky that I had that ability. Not everyone does. But if you do that, if you can do that, it really does open up all kinds of other things, because now you're meeting a new group of people in a different role. You learn a lot when you're making new acquaintances, and so it just kind of snowballs. So I would say, if someone's thinking about making an adjustment in what they're currently doing, you don't have to go from 100% to zero. Sometimes even a 10% allocation of your energy into something different, you realize it can open up a lot of opportunities. And then the decision is, okay, how far do I go with it? And not everyone has to go wholesale in a different direction, but I found I just really enjoyed it. So I kept going down the rabbit hole.
I love that. It kept saying yes, because so often, I love how you're kind of doing this mind bending thing. We also teach our faculty and leadership programs to no is a complete sentence. say no, because if you say yes to everything, you'll end up having to say no to the important things. And this is another example of being flexible, adaptable, and not saying no to things. That having the courage, sometimes using wisdom, good judgment, and asking mentors and looking deeply into those opportunities, maybe that is a yes. And so I liked how you described the blue ocean, your second principle, the blue ocean strategy of going, that maybe you do go in the red water to get your chops, to get the training, and then you quickly jump out of the red water because you don't have to necessarily stay there where the water is bloody and being chummed and you're fighting and scrapping and kicking each other. But you do the training in there, you earn the credibility, you learn from the experts, and then you hop out of that and go into a different pool. So I liked also that idea that just because you decide to go in a certain pool does not mean you must stay there. We don't have to stay. And that's another kind of irony, is that we don't want our faculty to, me and, faculty development, we don't want our faculty to leave, certainly not. And yet we want our faculty to be successful. You want them out of the nest and be able to say, oh, that's one of mine. And they went on to do wonderful things there. And so there is a certain pride in helping and sponsoring people to move to greener pastures or bluer waters. So there is that kind of push pull of how do you know when to stay in and how do you know when to get out of the water?
Yeah, I think that's very well said. And I would point out that if this is a podcast that's reaching Hopkins faculty, I mean, just by definition, they have gone deep into expertise at a level few people in the world can imagine. So it's not as though these are people who are, 18 and sort of scatterbrained, could never really decide what they want to do. I'm just offering that if that megawattage of talent wanted to explore something else, to most of the rest of the world, that would be, yes, we want that person on our board. We want that person in this role or this activity. And I think in medicine, we very quickly say, well, I'm only the left eyelid surgeon. I don't really know anything about the right eyelid anymore, because we so specialize. We feel like we can only be the expert in our very small defined niche. But to the rest of the world, that medical education, that surgical education would have all kinds of applications where sometimes we feel like we're not perhaps qualified, because then we leave our comfort of the cloak of super world authority, and so it's just, I think it's that comfort of saying, even though you've been very deep into an area of expertise, could you take a step out of that world to try something else? And so I think that's a little different than saying you're just throwing it all away,
No,
perhaps. So I hope I'm not
no,
in any way sounding like I'm encouraging residents to quit
to
your
go work at
residency.
Trader Joe's. No,
Yeah,
no, 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 no.
that's not what I'm. Hopefully, that's not the message.
No, and I love Trader Joe's, but no, I absolutely get it. I guess I'm going to an extremist idea of that, and I tend to kind of be an extremist. I'm like all or nothing. That's the point, though. One doesn't need to be all or nothing. You don't have to be in the game or out of the game. There are lots of games. And I like the way you've laid this out, especially the idea of the Pareto principle. Can you tell us more about that? The 464 that don't have to, because I can imagine some faculty members all around the world listening to this going, okay, this is intriguing. I can get behind this. I'm scared though, because I have such intense pressure on me to generate RVU, to get grants, to write papers, to train students and trainees and build programs and serve on committees and make a national, international impact. All these, the careerism weighing down on me. And I do love music, or I do want to learn more about how the funds flow. I'd love to learn more about engineering and how to make a device how do you, so I guess we're getting back to the courage thing. How did you finagle can you tell us more about the Pareto 464 split?
Yeah, of course. So the the Pareto principle is the 80-20. So the idea that 20%, let's take your patient census in the hospital. 20% of the patients that you're rounding on are going to take 80% of your time. And 20% of your grant activity, perhaps it's the writing or whatever it might be, is going to take 80% of your time. So it's really identifying that you don't have this equal distribution of effort and output. And I always thought that was very interesting. But I feel, or at least for me, now maybe again, some of this may be for how I felt like I was working hard just to stay in the race. But to try to get to the point where I felt like I was really doing well, it was more and more time and somewhat to diminishing returns. So it was really that question of do I think the rest of my career is going to be, how can I take that low anterior resection that I was, took a long time to learn how to do? How am I going to make that 5% more efficient, which is great and very important. But to juxtapose that to say, well, what if I was a surgeon who worked on public speaking, for example? Well, if I've never worked on public speaking and I put a small amount of time in public speaking, went to Toastmasters once a month, and then I had an opportunity to speak in front of the department, there are probably people who'd say, wow, that person sounded really knowledgeable. And it didn't mean I was any smarter than I was a month prior, but that 1 hour on how to do a public speaking perhaps could be more impactful to my career than 10 hours working on a surgical technique that I already knew how to do at pretty much a world-class level. So it's that idea of where are you going? If you can find a little bit of time in your schedule, are you going to put it into the 80 to get a return that at best is going to be 20? That's one way of looking at Pareto. Or are you going to put it into the 20 where you're not experienced and perhaps get the return of the 80? And then just for fun, I just squared it. So the same idea, if you had 80% of 80, it's 64%, and 20% of 20 is 4%. So that same idea that 4% of the effort perhaps could give you 64% of the return. And for something like business, for me, that was true. I had no idea. I knew nothing about accounting. But if I took an accounting class at night and didn't really worry too much how I did, well, now compared to a room full of surgeons, I was the accounting expert, perhaps, or at least in the top half. And the same thing with taking a class about contracts. If I took a course about contracts, now I know a lot more about contracts than most of the surgeons that I know. And that could be very helpful. So that was that idea of, if you're fortunate enough to have an hour or two that you can spend how you wish, are you doubling down on what you've already done, knowing that that's a very competitive environment? Or are you trying something very new and realizing, hey, maybe that hour I spent learning how to do PowerPoint presentations, actually using PowerPoint will make that presentation better. That could catch the eye of someone, and away you go.
Differentiation. And now I'm so excited because you've just made a commercial, Dr. Jay MacGregor, for faculty development.
Okay.
What you just said is something that just made my heart like opposite of the Grinch. My heart just grew like 10 times bigger. Yes, I love that. What you just said is, if you have an hour, right? So this is where that hard decision is, because, Jay, you're so right. It might be, if I had an hour, and I chose to do something career professional development, I could listen to a couple YouTubes about how to network. This is Kim talking, how to network and make friends. I already know how to do that. I'm like a pro at that. I'm off the charts extrovert. As you're saying, that's not going to do anything more to differentiate me from anyone else, or to differentiate me from me, or even arguably to interest me. It's my brain, this is again me personalizing, gets lit up, gets excited, turns on when there's something new. So that idea of, oh, could we like spin the wheel and randomly pick something, not totally randomly, but randomly ignite a different part of my brain that I can now draw a neural pathway to something else that exactly will not only make me, interested in something new and could spark all kinds of new ways of viewing things and different frames and different lens of looking at things. So I think that is a wonderful commercial for the Pareto in terms of making sure you recognize that you could spend more and more hours. So you're also, so the idea of someone who insists on, I am going to learn statistics if it kills me, and I'm going to write another grant application, and I got to wrap my head around structural equations modeling or linear regression, and how did that work again? And you're going to beat yourself up because you think you have to be the expert in everything, and you're going to spend more time. And the idea of diminishing returns, maybe you still get unscored, and you spend a lot of time trying to relearn something that is not in your wheelhouse, that you weren't trained to do, but you feel like you should do it because in academia, we feel like we should be the experts of everything and never ask for help. Or you could wrap your head around the idea that this is the law of diminishing returns. I could spend a lot of time doing this. It's really not going to pay off necessarily. I don't like it. I hate it. I'm not good at it. There are people right around the hallway from me, a whole department of people who will do this extraordinarily easily. That will help me in the long run if I partner with a biostatistician. They win, I win, and now I've freed up an hour to go learn about how to mitigate or how to get over conflict and mediate conflict. Boom.
Yep, I think you've got it, and I think it's that feeling of an hour. If you can just start with an hour a week, can you devote an hour a week to something you just want to learn how to do? And if it happens to promote and develop your career in some way, that's great. But even if it doesn't, I think just that feeling of, hey, I have an hour and this is just Kim time. And I know that many people listening today probably say, well, I have all these requirements and my family life is busy and all these things. And that's all true. But I would just encourage to just give it a try. See if you can find an hour a week. That's 4 hours a month for something that no one's going to grade or score. But it might be that little spark that adds to what you're doing. That would be great. If you can add to what you're doing, that's brilliant. And if it takes you a few degrees away from what you're currently doing, you may find that there's a position or a promotion or a way to be involved in your current work environment that just because you've now differentiated yourself, you're not really competing with anyone. You're stepping into a role that is made for you.
That's a perfect explanation of the paying yourself first, back to the old metaphor of the airplane when the oxygen, that if it delights you, if it brings you joy and even just giddy silliness. I have a friend who's learned the ukulele over COVID and she's still doing it. And there's a ukulele band, and she literally starts laughing and can barely talk to me when she talks about the ukulele concerts they do. And I am filled with joy listening to her. And so I'm envisioning faculty members listening to this right now thinking, yeah, that could be on the one hand, again, an extremist version. Who's got an hour? That must be nice. When I have an hour, I'm supposed to be exercising. I'm supposed to be meditating. I'm supposed to be taking a nap. I'm supposed to be finishing my charting. And yet, how fulfilling is it when you consciously, as you said, Jay, make a decision in my calendar, like I talk about in WAGs, writing accountability groups. You put the hour of writing in your week and you start on time, you stop on time, you just write for an hour. That way you get into regular habit. You're not binge writing. You're not saying in your calendar, work on paper today, but you're saying, draft paragraph 2 of the introduction today from 2 to 3. You stop on time, you get into this routine. And so once you have something in your calendar, you've decided to do it, you've committed to it, it's for you, even if it is practice ukulele, you've decided to do it. You chose to do it. It was not something that so much of in our life is put upon us. and thou shalt, thou must, you should, shoulding and woulding all over ourselves. But this is something I want to do, right? And so I think, like you said, even if it's not, well, that's not going to get you promoted. It's not going to get you another paper. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe I'll meet a fellow ukulele player who's going to give me some wonderful life advice, or who knows somebody who knows somebody. Or minimally, I'm going to come off of that hour feeling like happy, feeling joyful, feeling restored, renewed. And now I can go back into the OR, go back to the keyboard and write and be back with my kids and feeling more full instead of always depleted.
Absolutely. And I also think a lot of physicians that I know, there is great joy in feeling like you're improving at something. And because by definition we're so deep into our expertise, it can get harder and harder to feel like you're actually improving, even when you're at the top of, literally at the top of the whole food chain or the pyramid. And taking on something brand new, it really does give you that joy of, you can get a lot better at the guitar if you've never played the guitar before. And so I'm such a big advocate for that, just because it feels good. And if it happens to benefit in some other way, which I would argue it almost has to, because of how interconnected everything is in the world right now. But if it can benefit in some other way, that's even better. But as kind of a mental health strategy, burnout strategy, and if you get some way that you can tie that into your next talk or paper, then even better.
Yeah, and I like the way you're also setting this up, the way you're talking about this, is it also contributes to this idea of changing the culture and reducing stigma around burnout and this kind of self-doubt, and saying, hey, we all get to the point in our lives where we're like, is this all there is? And especially when you reach certain benchmarks in our lives where we're like, okay, I just got promoted. I just got my first assistant professor. Now I'm an associate professor. Now I'm a leader of this. Now I'm a vice president of that. And you always think, well, once this happens, then I'm going to be fill in the blank. What? Rich, happy, healthy, content. And then you do get there. And you oftentimes were like, really? And so because we're all wrapped up in this kind of growth and discovery and knowledge, we're all learners just by virtue of the fact of where we are. We do crave, I strongly believe our brains crave newness and knowledge. And so another thing I love about what you're talking about is I'm a gerontologist and do faculty development. So I've been spending a lot of time the past few years thinking about late career faculty members and mid-career. And those of us who have this, I think you mentioned earlier, some little bit of existential angst of recognizing, oh, really? Yeah, this is the millionth time I've done this procedure. The 200th time that I've had a paper rejected, and on and on and on. And you kind of go, oh, bother. Is this it? You kind of Winnie the Pooh yourself. And so I like the way these principles, I mean, Jay, I can imagine addressing the adjacent possible, the blue ocean strategy, Pareto principle, talent stacking, paying yourself first. All of those principles can be applied later in our lives as we're thinking, when I'm transitioning away from full-time employment, who am I? What is my identity? What is my purpose? What meaning do I have? What value do I bring to society if I'm not the colorectal surgeon? Well, part of that identity or creating yourself is applying these principles to, especially I can see that talent stacking, preparing for the next iteration of you, while you can realize you can get off that record that's spinning around, or you can get out of that pool and what's over there in that blue ocean. So I like how these principles are adaptable not only to early career faculty members starting off, like preparing them. Just because it is this way doesn't mean it has to be so. And then mid-career and late career. So your principles, Jay, really kind of are so, applicable across our whole life course. So thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks. This is really fun. The other thing there's a great book, I believe it's called Strength to Strength. And in that book, they talk about the idea that our fluid intelligence peaks quite early and our crystallized intelligence much later. So, and just that idea of, when you might come up with the breakthrough in math, it's probably in your 20s, maybe your 30s. And various disciplines, you peak physically for surgery, you probably peak in your late 30s or early 40s. And that doesn't mean you can't still continue to do fantastic work, but the idea of being able to work overnight without sleep and be doing 12-hour cases and have your body do that, it's very hard on you. I mean, it's a wonderful thing. I know there are tremendous surgeons who operate into their 70s, but for most of us mortals, your body really does break down with some of that physical demand. And being able to engage more of your crystallized intelligence, perhaps even your wisdom, if I can use that term, but that really is helpful, and it is something you can do for a long, long time. And I think that's also this neat idea that maybe you will be doing fluid intelligence activities in the first half of your career and crystallized intelligence activities in the second half of your career. And I think that's a way of you're really utilizing how your brain perhaps is designed to work, and you're not trying to just be, doing cases for 100 hours a week into your 60s, which for many of us, I think makes it even more challenging, more exhausting, and perhaps frustrating.
You're so right, Jay. I mean, literally what you said is what I've heard in the courses we run for called the next chapter for our later career faculty around like say 55-ish and starting to think about what's the next chapter, and, not necessarily retirement, but replenishment. And I've heard exactly those words. I'm just as good as I've been ever in the OR. I have, perfect, dexterity. I can do the surgery. I'm really good at it. It's just that when I used to be able to stand for long periods of time and then grab a bite to eat and come back in, I get more tired. It takes me longer to bounce back. So you're exactly right. The physical effort of doing that is more exhausting. So, but everything cognitively is still there. So that is kind of the challenge and the honesty, and how you've just, been so back to the courage. I have to get her back to courage. The courage to fight convention, to poke your head up and say, yeah, maybe not so much, maybe. And I think that's another beautiful thing about the generations coming up behind us, that there's some evidence that they're not so enamored by some of these flowery traditions of the way we do things around here, and more insistent that they live their values and work with institutions and work for organizations that hold the same values and practice those, and have more and have integrity. And so I think that my hope is that we'll see more Dr. Jay MacGregors as we move forward, and it won't be such a really, how curious, this doctor who's a colorectal surgeon got an MS and a master's MS. Was it an MS?
Well, an MBA and then a master's in jurisprudence.
So is it MJD? MJP? I don't know what the master's
Yeah, it's MJ or MJUR.
MJ, okay.
It's one of those degrees no one's heard of, but
I never knew that was a thing. And that would be something interesting to me, because you just think, I would love to go, especially if they weren't graded and didn't have to turn in assignments. That's one of the beauties of just learning stuff, just to learn stuff for its own sake. But who would have thought that one can dabble in these things? Yes. And a lot of there's just so much potential there, when I think we just spend all that time, as you mentioned earlier, being so narrowly focused that surely that our brains, I picture the brain going, okay, this one little sliver has made you a world-class colorectal surgeon. And there's a whole bunch of brain in there going, well, feed me. I'm hungry too. And it's our brains are just so hungry to not only get new knowledge, but to connect with other people. Because where's all that knowledge? It's in the heads of other people. So I always say my brain is a zombie. My brain craves other brains. It wants other brains to light up. And so that it's built into us. I think it's encoded in us to want to learn more. And so why not? Why not break the mold? Do what we're good at, do what we love, do what we're obviously meant to do, and not a but, and be willing to explore and be courageous and feed the other parts of our brain and our souls, right?
Well said, Kim. I couldn't agree more.
Well, Dr. Jay MacGregor, I told you folks, I knew this was going to be a great one. I would love it if you could read his piece. I'm not sure if the Alpha Omega Alpha Medical Society has this article, the newsletter, the Pharos Winter 2023 edition. Maybe, I can put a link to it in on the facultyfactory.org. So I'm going to put a link to this article. That's so good. It's such a great read. He talks about in Act 1, the departure, Act 2, initiation, a third start, Act 3, the return. It's just super good. It's a really great read. It really feels good in the heart, in the soul, in the brain. Dr. Jay MacGregor, thank you so much. I'm going to leave the parting words to you because you're definitely the hero of this story today. But you say goodbye to everybody.
Kim, thank you so much. It's just really a great honor. Johns Hopkins is one of those places that I have admired my whole life, and it's really I'm humbled to be able to talk to you and reach any of the faculty there. But thank you again, and thank you also to Dr. Rachel Salas. She's a great friend, and obviously without her connection, I wouldn't be speaking to you. So thank you both. It's really been a treat.
Hello, everybody. It's your podcast producer, Casey, and I just wanted to let you know that as of September 1st, 2023, this podcast has had nearly 76,000 total downloads and YouTube views from listeners in 84 different countries. On the Faculty Factory website, facultyfactory.org has drawn nearly 40,000 web visits from users in 122 different countries. It's truly an international platform, and we would love to invite you, no matter where you are, to be a guest on this show. Our host, Dr. Skorupski, makes the experience very engaging, relaxing, and it's all recorded on Zoom, so no matter where you are, we would love to have you join her for an episode. As producer, I'll make any edits that you'd like, so there's no pressure to nail it on the first go or anything like that. We just want to hear from different faculty around the world so we can learn from each other. Reach out if you'd like to be a guest. You can contact us on facultyfactory.org/contact, or you can email Dr. Skorupski directly at kskorupski@jhmi.edu.
Thanks for tuning in to Faculty Factory Podcast. The mission of the Faculty Factory is to build and support a community of leaders in faculty development who share tools, resources, wisdom, and encouragement in service to our faculty members, schools, and institutions. We encourage you to go to facultyfactory.org to find out more, get in touch with me, ask me any questions. Maybe you want to be interviewed on the podcast. Thanks for tuning in to Faculty Factory Podcast. We'll see you next time. The Faculty Factory podcast and website is sponsored by the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine Office of Faculty. For more information, visit facultyfactory.org.